Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging headfirst into, well, one of the most critical situations globally right now, the Israel-Iran conflict.
Absolutely. It's really escalating.
Yeah, it's now entering its second week. We're seeing simultaneous military strikes, but also intense diplomatic maneuvering, often kind of frantic behind the scenes.
You're spot on. And today, our mission is really to try and unravel this incredibly complex web. You know, the actions, the reactions, the international implications. It's a lot.
It is.
We've pulled together insights from, well, a really rich stack of sources, in-depth analysis, reports from a major international news channel.
Right, correspondents actually on the ground.
Exactly. In key places like Tehran, Geneva, Amman, Moscow, Quetta. Plus, we've got perspectives from academic specialists, former diplomats weighing in.
So our goal for this deep dive is to distill the most crucial bits, maybe some surprising facts, from all of that. We want to help you, our listener, get a quick grasp on just how multifaceted this is.
From the front lines, the actual military stuff, to the quieter diplomatic efforts.
And the ripple effects, of course, across the whole region. So yeah, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the past week, significant military exchanges, clearly. We've seen reports, Israeli military strikes in and around Tehran.
Yeah, and missile hits reported on the outskirts of Rash, that northern city.
Right, Rash. And there were visuals, explosions lighting up the sky over the capital.
Quite dramatic. But what's also really fascinating from the other side is Iran's retaliation. We saw what's being called a very unique lone missile strike.
Where was that?
In Beersheba, down in southern Israel. And this missile, it apparently impacted near a technology park.
A technology park.
Yeah, and if you look at the park's website, it seems it's right next to a Ben Gurion University campus. And interestingly, an Israeli Army C4I unit.
C4I, so cyber and communications.
Exactly, cybersecurity, telecommunications. And reports say heavy damage was sustained. Notably, a building housing Microsoft offices was hit.
Wow, so that's not just random damage?
No, definitely not. It feels like a signal, you know?
Yeah.
A shift towards targeting critical tech and cyber infrastructure. It makes this attack feel like more than just symbolic.
And sirens went off, obviously.
Oh yeah, across Beersheba, nearby towns. And Iran was explicit, they stated, the attack targeted a technology park, specifically mentioning military and cyber institutions housed there.
Okay, so we have this active battlefield, tit-for-tat strikes, but like you said, diplomacy is happening too. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, he went to Geneva.
That's right, for meetings with his counterparts from the UK, France, and Germany, the E3.
The E3, right. And this is being framed as like the first major diplomatic effort since things really kicked off.
It is. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Even before the talks, Abbas Araghchi's public line, stated on Iranian state TV, was pretty hardline.
Oh, what did he say?
He said Iran has refused any U.S. diplomatic approaches, and, quote, they don't wish to engage in dialogue with any party, while, quote, the Zionist entity's aggression against us continues.
So no talks while they're being attacked.
Pretty much. They view Washington as a partner in these crimes, is how they put it, and stress their legitimate defense. So, yes, he went to Geneva. The Europeans invited him.
But Iran's perspective is?
From their perspective, the talks don't seem, well, that much meaningful. They said they're there to listen, essentially, not to negotiate.
Okay, so if Iran is saying up front they won't negotiate under fire, and they're refusing U.S. approaches, what do the E3 nations, the UK, France, Germany, realistically hope to achieve in Geneva? I mean, what leverage do they actually have?
Well, they're definitely aiming for, some sort of diplomatic headway. Their main hope seems to be just stopping this conflict from escalating further, from widening.
Damage control, basically.
Kind of. And it's maybe significant that the UK Foreign Minister, David Lammy, he met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and also Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, in Washington before heading to Geneva.
Ah, okay, so the E3 are maybe trying to act as a bridge between Washington and Tehran.
Potentially. That seems to be the role they're trying to play. But, you have to remember, even though they were signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal.
The one Trump pulled the U.S. out of in 2018.
Exactly. Because of U.S. sanctions that followed their own financial mechanisms like Instex, they just couldn't really engage with Iran effectively. So their past inability to sort of keep the deal alive on their own, it does limit their leverage now.
Right. That makes sense. So shifting focus a bit, let's talk about the U.S. role, or maybe lack thereof for now. President Trump. He said he'll decide on U.S. involvement within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, that 2-week window.
Alongside calling for Tehran's unconditional surrender, which is quite a statement.
It absolutely is. And at the same time, the White House press secretary has mentioned that Trump is still hopeful about talks with Iran. It's a bit mixed.
How's that playing out in Israel, do we know? Trump delaying his decision?
Well, the public statements from Israel frame their campaign as having free reign, mentioning 40 to 60 fighter jets carrying out strikes. But behind the scenes, the reaction is likely one of deep disappointment over Trump's delay. It seems likely. You're seeing public calls in Israel, politicians like Yoav Gallant urging Trump to join in. There are even billboards reportedly in Tel Aviv with Trump's picture saying, "Mr. President, finish the job."
Wow. Billboards.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's also clear appreciation for the continued U.S. support. Reports mention 14 more shipments of weapons and munitions just arrived from the U.S., so they're getting tangible help.
Okay, and underlying so much of this, obviously, is the nuclear question. You mentioned the 2015 deal. Let's just quickly revisit the nuclear talks that were happening between the U.S. and Iran before this latest flare-up. They didn't make much headway, right? What were the main sticking points?
Yeah, those talks really hit an impasse. The core disagreements were pretty fundamental. The U.S. was insisting that Iran basically can't enrich any uranium on its own soil.
Can't run at all.
Their position was Iran should only import nuclear fuel already enriched elsewhere, just for domestic power needs.
And Iran's view?
Iran rejected that outright. They insisted enrichment on their own soil was acceptable, a sovereign right even. Plus, the U.S. wanted to loop Iran's ballistic missile program into the nuclear talks.
Which Iran refused.
Completely. They said ballistic missiles were a completely separate thing, not up for discussion in that context. And honestly, there's zero indication either side has significantly shifted on those core positions.
And you mentioned an Iranian perspective earlier.
Yeah.
Something about U.S. involvement in the Israeli strikes.
Yes. A professor from the University of Tehran voiced a view that's likely shared by many there, claiming Israel wouldn't be able to sustain these kinds of attacks without direct U.S. help, specifically alleging the U.S. is helping Israeli jets with refueling.
Calling it a joint American-Israeli project.
Exactly. That's the perception, or at least the allegation coming from Tehran.
Okay, so beyond the main players, this conflict obviously creates huge ripple effects across the region. And we have to keep reminding ourselves, even with all eyes on Israel, Iran, the crisis in Gaza is just grinding on. That must be factoring into regional dynamics too.
Absolutely. You're right to bring Gaza back into focus. It's crucial. The situation there remains horrific. The latest reports, at least 50 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces while waiting for food parcels near the Nuseirat corridor.
Just waiting for aid.
Yeah. And that apparently followed 16 other aid seekers killed in the same area the day before. It's being widely described as deliberate targeting by the Israeli military.
And drone attacks.
A big rise in drone attacks, yeah. Reports mention around 12 strikes in just 24 hours. One airstrike killed 8 members of a single family. The daily average death toll is still appallingly high, somewhere between 70 and 100 Palestinians killed each day.
And basic survival.
It's incredibly difficult. The power grid is destroyed, so people are relying on, charging points where they can find them or scarce solar panels. It's a constant underlying crisis that absolutely shapes how the region views everything else happening.
It has to.
Yeah.
Okay, thinking broader regionally then. Yeah. What about Russia? They have very deep links with Iran. How are they navigating this? They must be watching very closely.
Oh, very closely. And what's fascinating is their shared strategic interests, right? Both Iran and Russia are heavily sanctioned by the West.
Right, pushing them together economically.
Exactly. They're seeking trade partners that don't rely on the U.S. dollar. They even formalized things with a strategic partnership treaty back in January. Russia helped build Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plants. They do joint military drills.
Like the one in the Gulf of Oman recently.
Yeah.
With China, too.
That's the one back in March. So the ties are strong. But Russia's main concern here seems to be instability on its southern border. Iran's a huge neighbor, 92 million people.
So they don't want chaos there.
Definitely not. However, Vladimir Putin has been really clear. Russia will, quote, by no circumstances get involved directly in this war.
Why not?
His reasoning is it's not a war that directly touches upon Russian interest. And crucially, Russia's military capacity is focused on the Ukrainian conflict. He also pointed out their strategic partnership treaty doesn't include any clause about defense, and that Iran didn't ask us about this anyway.
Interesting. So support, but limits.
Clear limits. But Moscow is also taking a strong stance on principle, saying any attempts at regime change or to kill a leader of the independent state are unacceptable under international law. So it's a cautious but strategically aligned approach.
Okay. Let's shift gears again, look at Pakistan. The conflict is apparently hitting cross-border trade hard. Iran is Pakistan's fifth biggest export market.
That's right. And the economic impact is pretty concrete, pretty immediate. We're talking halted imports and exports, fruits, vegetables, even mangoes, and a severe hit for imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Which affects...
Well, livelihoods, truckers, for one.
Sorry.
But also many ordinary people rely on cheaper, often smuggled, Iranian petrol and diesel. It accounts for, get this, 14% of Pakistan's annual fuel consumption.
14%. Wow, that's huge.
It really highlights the economic interdependence and the sort of human cost when that trade gets disrupted. Pakistan officially has condemned the unprovoked strikes and expressed indignation about attacks near nuclear sites.
And they have strategic worries, too.
Yeah, particularly given India's close ties with Israel. So there's an economic hit and a layer of strategic concern for Islamabad.
Okay, so it brings us back to Iran itself.
Yeah.
What's the mood inside Iran amidst all this? Are these attacks dividing people or uniting them?
It's complex, as you'd expect. Reports suggest the public mood is understandably extremely angry. But alongside that anger, there seems to be a prevailing sense of unity.
Really?
Yeah, drawing on what they call a culture of resistance, which is deeply rooted in their experience of the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s. The imposed war, as they often call it.
So a kind of rally around the flag effect.
Yeah. Exactly. We've seen evidence of that, large crowds protesting in Tehran and other cities, holding Iranian flags, expressing increased support for the country's leadership, especially, apparently, after the direct threats from Trump and the Israeli defense minister.
And even opposition figures.
Yeah, interestingly, even some opposition leaders, who obviously have their own deep disagreements with the government, have publicly condemned the Israeli attack as unprovoked.
And the talk of regime change from Israel?
That definitely plays into it. The Israeli defense minister explicitly mentioned regime change as a goal. Many Iranians, according to reports from Tehran, see this as an attempt to, quote, turn Iran into another Libya or even balkanize Iran. That kind of threat tends to solidify internal resolve against what they see as external aggression.
Okay, so looking ahead then, diplomacy seems really difficult right now. What are the biggest hurdles for actually achieving some kind of de-escalation?
Well, the immediate massive hurdle is Iran's stated refusal to negotiate while under attack. That's a non-starter for them, it seems. And then there's this other interesting factor. The clock is ticking on those snapback mechanisms for the E3.
The sanctions snap back.
Yeah.
From the old nuclear deal.
Exactly. Those provisions technically expire in October, but the E3 have apparently set themselves a kind of mid-August deadline to decide whether to trigger them. That really limits the time frame they have to exert any kind of pressure on Iran using that specific tool.
So a shrinking window for that kind of leverage. What about the role of domestic politics? We touched on it with Trump and Israel. How much is that driving decisions here?
It's always a factor, isn't it? Critics have certainly argued for years that Benjamin Netanyahu might see conflict with Iran as a way to, shore up his own domestic political standing.
And maybe validate his longstanding warnings about Iran.
Possibly. That could be part of the calculation. But there's a strong counter-argument, too. Even if Israel, say, succeeded in significantly damaging Iran's nuclear capability, does that solve Israel's deeper challenges?
You mean like Gaza, the occupation?
Exactly. The ongoing situation in Gaza, the occupation, issues that many sources describe using the term apartheid. The argument is that those fundamental problems wouldn't just disappear, even with a quote-unquote victory over Iran's nuclear program. Those challenges would remain.
And the legality aspect.
Right. From the Iranian legal perspective, they often emphasize UN Charter Article 2.4, that using force or even the threat of force to extract concessions from another country is illegal under international law. Their point is that any demands, particularly from the U.S., should go through the proper channels, like the UN Security Council.
So lots of obstacles, differing perspectives on legality, domestic pressures. It's incredibly tangled.
It really is. And as we sort of wrap up thinking about the immediate strikes and the diplomatic scrambling, maybe a final thought to consider is this. When a conflict gets this deeply tangled up with domestic politics on all sides, with deep historical grievances, with these constantly shifting regional alliances, can any single victory actually lead to lasting peace?
Or does it just kind of reset the board for the next round.
Exactly. Does it just set the stage for the next set of challenges? It makes you wonder, what really is the most critical factor right now that will determine where this goes next? There are just so many moving parts.